Up until now, we haven't really talked much about relationships, and that's of course because sex does not have to happen in relationships. But of course, I do think that we should talk a little bit about it, and of course, there's a little bit of information about relationships based on evolution. So, um, here are some terms that some of you might know. So, monogamy, of course, is this idea of pair bonding that is either going to last the duration of the mating season or possibly a lifetime. So, you can be monogamous with, say, certain species that only have mating seasons, only when the female's in estrus, meaning that she's able to have, offspring, and maybe they'll just be monogamous during that short period of time and then go back to having no sort of pair bonding, or for a lifetime, like for example, some human beings make it the whole lifetime, while others don't. But yeah, so monogamy doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be for life. Okay, in the arrangement of polygamy, it's one individual that forms a relationship with several individuals of the opposite sex. So polygamy, a lot of people assume it means that it's one male with a lot of females, but technically it doesn't have to be. It can be one female with a lot of males. Now, polygyny is the one that would be one male with multiple females. So again, we say polygamy, and a lot of times people think that means that it's one male with multiple females, but the correct terminology would be polygyny. And then there's a term called polyandry, which maybe some of you have heard, but this would actually be a single female with a harem of males. And of course, this is less common, but it definitely still happens. Okay. Now, of course, when we're talking about all these bondings, there's promiscuity that comes about. And there, people might question, why would you be promiscuous? Well, males may be promiscuous, of course, in order to increase their number of offspring. So the reason why a male might step outside of the arranged bond that they have, is so that maybe they can get more offspring, since a female can only have one offspring at a time. And say for humans, that would be, say that it'd be a 9-month duration before that person is able to have another child, and typically if you're breastfeeding, that could be even longer. So if a male were to step outside the relationship, then he would be able to possibly increase his number of offspring. Now, females may be promiscuous for different reasons. So they might be promiscuous in order to gain access to more resources, to get better quality sperm, or to safeguard their offspring from a new dominant male. So, for example, in some primate species, let's say, where there's harems, for example, say a gorilla or something, say that a gorilla has a harem, a male gorilla has a harem of women, which would then be polyandry, correct? And he gets into a fight with another male gorilla, and the other male gorilla wins. Well, the female gorillas that are pregnant, they might be the first in line to have sex with the new male gorilla, because they're trying to maybe try to convince the new male that when they give birth to the new gorilla, that the new baby gorilla, that it's his. Because if the male gorilla, the new male gorilla in town, is not convinced, then he's likely to kill off that baby. Because of course, what does he need to take care of someone else's gorilla offspring? So that might be a possibility, to be in order to obtain better quality sperm. So this is the idea that you have a male who's willing to take care of you, but maybe he's not the most attractive, or he doesn't have the best genes. And so this female would like to get better genes, but maybe better genes from a male that's not willing to invest as much. So then she would want to keep the male that she has, but maybe just not have his genes. And of course, the idea of gaining better resources. So you guys might have heard of the bonobos. The bonobos are considered very promiscuous, and so they tend to do this quite a bit. They use sex as a mean of bartering. So for example, I had seen a video in which a male bonobo had some food, And the female bonobo wanted some of that food, and the male wasn't willing to give it to her. And so what did she do? She ended up having sex with him, and then when he was done and he was nice and relaxed, she just took the food from his hand. And so she was able to gain better resources, get food from him just by giving him sex. So those are the evolutionary reasons why people, or again, other species might be promiscuous. Now, sometimes people ask me, well, what if, I, cheated, or my partner cheated, and he used a condom, so of course he didn't want to have offspring. Well, even though that might not be his personal reason for cheating, the idea is that this is kind of how promiscuity has evolved. So this is maybe why he is looking around, even if he himself doesn't want to get pregnant, or why a female may be promiscuous, even if it's not specifically to obtain better quality sperm or resources or safeguarding. But of course, this is evolved in us, so it's still in our genes, even if it's not personally something that you're thinking about. Okay, so what does female promiscuity lead to? Well, it leads to what's called mate guarding. So this is responses by males. So mate guarding would be that the male is going to stay close to the female when she's fertile, and he's going to fight off other males, right? Because again, from an evolutionary standpoint, there'd be nothing worse than a male taking care of another offspring's child. Now I'm talking just evolution, and that's because if you're talking evolution and everything's boiling down to genes, then that person is that male, maybe not even a human, just any male, is using a lot of resources without getting any of his genes out there. So that's one thing that happens, is that when the female is reproductively viable, that the male might be very keen on this and make sure to keep other males away so that there's less chances that this would happen. Now with human beings, it's more difficult because, we're reproductively viable every month, versus other animals have estrus, which might just be a few months out of the year that they're reproductively viable. And then the other thing that happens is the production of larger numbers of sperm. And of course, this is the idea that a male might produce more sperm because he's quite literally trying to blast out the other sperm that might be in the woman's vagina. So that his sperm are more likely to be the ones that lead to the reproduction. So again, some interesting fact is we can tell a lot about a species based on the sperm count and or testicle size of the males. So you might be surprised to know this, but gorillas have rather small testicles, and humans, human males, so men, have the largest testicles out of all of the primate species. And so what does that say? Well, that would say that that females in the evolutionary past were probably very promiscuous. Because, for example, the reason why male gorillas have smaller testicles is because they have a harem, right? They have that polygamy type of setup. So the male is less concerned about the female finding other males because he has many of them, and he doesn't need to worry about that as much. Well, because humans have such large testicles and high sperm counts, it leads us to believe that the females, that women in our evolutionary past, were likely much more promiscuous than other primates. Okay. The other thing is, which is kind of a unfortunate topic, but males also might copulate with females by force. So because the females are so picky, sometimes males, their best reproductive strategy would be just to take the female by force, because although, of course, morally that sounds really awful and wrong, it is a way in which he might be able to impregnate her, right? So this does occur in many species. And we also find that some animals actually have anatomical adaptations to combat this forced copulation. So, for example, if you look at rats, they have to arch their back. It's called lordosis. They have to arch their back in order to reveal their vagina so that the male can copulate. Well, if she doesn't want to copulate, then if she doesn't arch her back, then it's much harder for the male to copulate with the female. So that would be an example of, say, an anatomical adaptation, which might aid in forced copulation. So here's some examples. So this is the difference. This is a beetle that is engaging in the top one. A is two beetles engaging in consensual reproduction, and below would be B. This would be the other option, which would be taking the beetle from behind and having forced reproduction. So again, this is happening in beetles. It's not just humans or primates. This happens in beetles as well. Okay, so of course there's a lot of non-reproductive sex that happens, right, between either, two males, which of course by definition is non-reproductive, or between two females, which is non-reproductive, or of course males and females, we also have non-reproductive sex all the time as well. And as I had said before, bonobos engage in non-reproductive sex, and it can be for all different reasons: alliance formation, conflict resolution. So sex can be used for many things that are not just reproductive based. Again, though, however, just because we, as humans, say, have non-reproductive sex all the time, it doesn't mean that we still don't have the same evolved mechanisms that everyone else has, that are only engaging in reproductive sex. So again, this is how evolution works, that we still all have these mechanisms in place even if we are having non-reproductive sex. All right, now I'm going to change a bit. This was in your book, and this is talking about sex with kin. So this seems to be something far more universal, that having sex with kin tends to just be disgusting and morally abhorrent for a lot of people. So again, it makes you wonder if there's an evolutionary reason for this. So this is a story about a stepbrother and a stepsister. That's who we're looking at in that picture. And they had met far later in life, in adulthood, and they had fallen in love, and I don't know if they actually were married or not, but of course they were in sexual relations. Their names are Nick Cameron and Danielle Haley. But of course they're half siblings, so they definitely have shared genes. So this should disgust them. So why does it not? Well, first let's talk about why would sex with kin disgust us on an evolutionary basis. So of course, this would be closer to asexual reproduction, right? You have less genes to swap, and therefore you have a higher likelihood of genetic malformations, right? So bigger issues with your offspring, and just less genetic variation, which we found out earlier in part 1 that would be a really negative consequence. So of course this is why, evolutionarily speaking, we should not want to have sex with our kin. But what we find is that this disgust tends to come about in the raising process. So if you are raised with your opposite sex siblings, then of course you're far less likely to want to have any sexual relationships with them, and you're far more likely to find it disgusting. But the problem is that if in this day and age, there's a lot of times that you are not raised with your kin, right? You're not raised with your siblings. And we find is that when you're not raised with your siblings, that's when you're more likely to find sex with siblings less disgusting. So there's something about the raising process, about being around these people at very young ages, that is going to disgust you. And so, for example, with the story of Nick and Danielle here, they weren't raised together, and therefore they maybe weren't as disgusted as they would have been if they were raised together. And we'll talk about attraction in later chapters, but we actually find that people who look more like you, you tend to like more. So if you aren't raised with your kin, that they actually might be someone you'd find very attractive later in life. So again, it seems to be something about the way that that raising them together. So by this argument, stepbrothers and stepsisters who have no genetic connection, if they're raised together, you might be more disgusted by that than, say, a actual biological kin that isn't raised together. And this concludes the lecture for Chapter 2.